North Dakota's abortion ban, saying the state constitution creates the fundamental right to access abortion before a fetus is viable.
State District Judge Bruce Romanik's ruling would make early abortions legal in North Dakota immediately. But right now, there are no clinics in the state that perform them after the Red River Women's Clinic moved across the border from Fargo to Moorhead. Its executive director, Tammy Kromanacher, says she has no plans to move back, but she still considers this ruling a big win.
Today's decision gives me hope. I feel like the court heard us when we raised our voices against the law that not only ran counter to our state constitution, but was too vague for physicians to interpret and which prevented them from providing the highest quality care that our communities are entitled to.
Republican State Attorney General Drew Wrigley promises to appeal that decision. He released a statement which reads, in part, he has appropriate regard for the state district court, but that the judge's opinion inappropriately casts aside the law crafted by the legislative branch of our government.